Coltrane was like, he went into Christianity as his like replacement for his heroin addiction, which is why he was like went super hard into like the God thing. But it wasn't even Christianity; it was just the idea of like God, which that was like became the focus of all of his work, was trying to resonate with that in some way, you know. And that's so I think that's, he obviously had one of those addictive personalities where, you know, whenever he was using heroin, obviously he was all in. Musically, he was all in, and then whenever he got off the heroin, then he was like, "I'm going into like the divine, like
Dude,
God."
He sounds like me.
Like, yeah,
Fuck.
yeah. It's an archetype, you know. Yeah.
What was
It's
his
archetype.
version of God? What did that look like?
I mean, I would say he was tapping into a thing before like the terms of like source were popularized.
Yes.
And there was like language to describe that. That's in my opinion, that's what he was tapping into.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, now you're right. We have an ability to articulate it through these kind of common...
Yeah. There's been enough time and like expansion to where it's been around enough. Because, you know, if you think about like, also this record, like he was like, had a moment of awakening where he told Alice Coltrane, actually his wife is like one of my favorite musicians of all time. Alice
didn't know she was a
Coltrane. Oh my
musician.
God, man. It's insane.
Alice?
Alice Coltrane. Yeah. Dude. She's preposterous.
What? Okay, if I buy one album, do you have one that you would...
One. If I had to tell someone one, I guess I'd say Journey into Satchitananda.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably...
What does
That's a good-
Satchitananda mean? I've heard, is that like I've heard that from Ram Dass maybe?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's basically, you know, in Hinduism, it's like the, you know, the divine land, you know. So I would,
Like,
yeah.
Is that like a metaphorical inward?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. And so I would definitely check that record out. You could just order it. It's awesome.
Done. I'll do it
She's-
when we're done here.
Yeah, she's like one of my heroes. Like if you take the same level of like flexibility and like organic breathing nature of like this album, slow it way down, and then add like harp and like Indian instruments. So it's like this slow, like open, spacious with like rolling harp and like droning temporas and shit like that. This is the best.
Damn. So
And
did she? So she was obviously into Eastern philosophy.
oh yeah,
And
she was hardcore Hindu. She actually has she's passed away now, but she was always like even from the early days extremely into Hinduism, and she was a pianist at the beginning and then switched over to harp. But all of her work is dedicated to like Hindu themes, and so she was the one that brought that heavy sense of spirituality to Coltrane.
okay, I was gonna say. So how did that makes more sense where he was looking at it in a different context than people of that time?
Exactly. So like he, of course, you know, came from like the time and place where he was born, came from like Christianity was the only religious language he knew, but Alice brought over the kind of the totality that concepts from Hinduism and introduced him to him. And he like took those ideas and then kind of talked about them or thought about them through the words of Christian ideas and stuff like that, or like God and things like that, you know. But he wasn't like, I wouldn't say he was a hardcore Christian or something like that, or his stuff isn't religious in that way. It's just kind of the toolkit he had to talk about it, you know.
He just knew there was something much greater than himself.
Exactly. And some of his music is pretty far out, like after this record too. I mean, and then some of Alice's stuff is because she was a pianist at first, she plays a lot of organ and stuff on some of her albums, which she would definitely get more experimental, like musically. So some of her stuff might not, I don't know if it'd be enjoyable to you to listen to, but a lot of it is really beautiful and just super chill. But some of it gets almost kind of more atonal at some points. So, you know, so that's a good place to start, that record. And then also just to have like a good collection that's easy to listen to, but still beautiful is, there's a collection called, Luca Bop, who's, David Byrne from the Talking Heads, his record label.
Yeah.
He put out a World Spirituality Classics series. And so she released. So after Coltrane died, she basically just like hung out at this ashram in California for the rest of her life, and just recorded. And she would play like at their services, just like play the organ for like 6 hours at a time. And so there's a lot of like cassette recordings of that they were put out like as cassettes in the 80s and then just kind of vanished. So the collection that David Byrne put out is essentially that stuff restored, and it's amazing. It's really beautiful, and as I said, it's easy to listen to. So it'd be another good jumping off point.
What was her introduction into? Because it didn't seem like it would be today we have access to anything around the world.
Yeah,
Any idea what?
I believe that she met the same guru. I can't remember his name, but the same dude that the Beatles and George Harrison met. Yeah. I believe it was the same fella, and that was kind of because it was all happening at the same time. So think about when the Beatles were introduced, particularly George Harrison was getting into that around I think in the mid '60s. And you started hearing sitars and stuff in the Beatles songs.
Oh, okay.
That was because he was going to India and studying Hinduism and then also studying the music. And that's how he met Ravi Shankar. That's how Ravi Shankar played with the Beatles, is because of that. And at the same kind of cultural integrative moment was like whenever I think Alice Coltrane was really absorbing a lot of that at the same time.
Well, this is quite a musical interlude.
Were we recording?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Why not?
Yeah, it's totally fine. I didn't know.
That was unscripted, folks. As you can see, my guest today, Cory Allen, has a wealth of knowledge in music.
That was a good way to start with peak Coryness. That's how we started.
So buckle up, folks. We're going to get into a lot of different things. Cory, as you can tell, knows a ton about music. He's a self-taught music producer. And we'll get into binaural beats because I think for my audience, I think that's a little bit on the fringe. And so I'd love to share kind of what binaural beats are and how they've impacted your life. He also has a podcast called The Astral Hustle. A book out, Now is the Way. Oh gosh, what else do you have? He has a wealth of knowledge in many areas that we're going to try to tap into some of it today. And
so will I. I'll try to tap into some of it too. See what happens.
In fact, Peyton was just over here. My wife Peyton was over here to take the pre podcast photo, and we were talking. Cory was talking about this John Coltrane album, A Love Supreme, that you were just listening to, and really kind of unpacking it all for Peyton. And she's like, why aren't we recording this? I'm like, babe, we've been here for 30 minutes of just gold, and so I just know we're good. So for all of you who are listening, settle in for this one. You're going to enjoy it. So anyway, Cory and I literally just met 40 minutes ago when he came over to the house. We have a lot of mutual friends throughout Austin and outside of Austin. A mutual friend of ours, Kevin Kaiser, who we both think very dearly of. So thanks, Kevin, for the somewhat of a backhanded intro. But Cory followed me recently on Instagram. I was like, damn, this is the time. Cory, I've got the podcast. Like, would you be a guest? Thumbs up. So this has been in the works for a few weeks now. Today we're finally sitting down. And there's a lot to discuss. We're going to spend some time on his new book. I had a bunch of notes. I was telling Cory, I was listening to the audio book. And as you can tell by listening to Cory in the intro, he has an amazing voice. It's a voice that's just buttery and velvety. And so listening to the audio book of his book it's like listening to like kind of bedtime stories, almost through a solo cast. That's, your book was very intentional. You talk about it, how you wanted it to be a conversation. Mm-hmm. And you really wanted, because I think the subject of presence and mindfulness is challenging for people. I think what you did was remarkable because it lands, I think with everybody, it is a conversation. You discuss some things that are a little more challenging. You bring it down to a level where, for lack of a better term, the least common denominator can understand it.
Yeah.
I remember I started reading it when it came out because your launch strategy was frigging amazing.
Oh,
so
thanks.
we'll talk about that as
I'd love to hear some feedback and take some notes.
Well, I just noticed every podcast I was listening to, Cory was showing up the same week. I was like, that's dope. So I got the book, and I remember I dropped my son off at a tutoring, and I was reading the book, and I texted my wife, Peyton. I said, listen, he's saying like everything that I am experiencing right now. This is it. It makes perfect sense to me. And
it's another trick, by the way. We can go into that later.
What's that?
I said it's another trick, by the way. We'll go into that later.
Well, let's just hop into it then. Tell me about the trick.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me to your home and all the super words and everything. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, brother.
So it's good to meet in meet space here instead of in the digital space. But yeah, man, I mean, basically with the book anyway, I being in a position, with the podcast where I've, have spent years of people just getting constant feedback from people. It put me in a position to really understand, I think, what are universal things that people are struggling with, or challenges, or like the entry points into a lot of the themes and things that you were talking about, that I talked about in the book. What are the avenues that people find typically, and what works for people? And so at the beginning, like whenever I first started my podcast, like 4 or 5 years ago, I thought that all of the stuff that I was experiencing and had experienced throughout my life, because I got into this very young, when I was a teenager, just out of necessity. And
tell us about the necessity part.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically just growing up. To make a long story short, basically just growing up. Father was not around, very destructive type of fella. Kind of, I describe him as like a character out of a Quentin Tarantino movie. Then otherwise just being parented with conditional love, and a lot of emotional manipulation and things of that. And anyway, so I thought a lot of the philosophical or inner life issues that I was experiencing were just me. And I thought, holy shit, like something as weird as what I call existential paralysis, which is like having this level of awareness of the fact that you exist so much that the complexity of your awareness of your own existence becomes so overwhelming that it's hard to even function and process. Like I thought that was just being a weirdo outsider my entire life. Like that was just me, because I took a bunch of psychedelics as a teenager and was like into weird esoteric shit for my entire life. I was like, I must have just gotten to some weird dark road, and ended up there.
Some of us, it takes 47 years to get to that weird dark road, but I hear you, brother.
Yeah. And so whenever I started talking about those things on the podcast years ago, I was just like, they were things I'd experienced in life. And my thought was really like kind of this campfire idea, because I'm very into something that's important to me is like democrative knowledge, democrative information and sharing. The notion that one person has all of the answers or is some beacon of enlightenment, I think is total bullshit, because at the end of the day, we're all humans. There are larger and smaller and different perspectives on all of these ideas and on human life in general. But to assume for one to suggest that they are some specialist in the inward journey, to me, has never made sense. And I think it's actually a very slippery, dangerous path, right? For the person that's saying that and everyone around them. Yeah. Which ultimately, like my goal with all of this stuff, and one of the main values is authenticity, and ultimately realizing I have a huge audience on my podcast, and it's so important to me. I'd rather be less entertaining and not even have the chance of steering someone into spiritual bypassing or some further delusion, self-delusion. I'd rather them be challenged or be bored and have to confront truth and reality to further find the growth and development that they might not even know that they're looking for yet, right? And so Anyway, so this idea of like the campfire, knowledge sharing type of thing, where it's like, I'm not talking about these ideas. And even on the podcast, I never started to talk about these ideas because I want it to be some river mouth that, is giving the knowledge to all of the people, right? Because that's bullshit. And I think growing up listening to death metal a lot whenever I was a teenager really helped that, It's like, it gives you this, I have just enough like aggressive anti-authoritarian like beakiness of like pecking at all the structures of everything.
I was wondering where that connection was. I didn't see it at first, but that makes perfect sense.
It really inoculated me towards that type of thing in a good way, But anyway, so I look at like the information is like we're all, if you track it back to like hunter-gatherer type of time, right? So I'm walking through the forest one day and I hear a sound and a jaguar jumps out and tries to kill me. I choke it to death or whatever. Or let's make it that nicer. I was just being honest. What would happen?
How about you just submit it and put it to sleep?
Yeah.
For all the PETA fans out there.
If we're being really honest, I would just die. But yes. I would get eaten. Let's say we meet eye to eye. There's a beautiful harp sound, and we fall in love, become friends, and then that jaguar moves on its merry way. So then I go to the campfire at the end of the day, where I'm sitting around with the other hunter-gatherer sapient fellas and ladies, and I say, hey, by the way, if you happen to hear this sound while you're walking through the forest, watch out, because I almost got killed because that sound was what I heard before this jaguar jumped out. So like heads up, and everyone goes, okay, cool. That's the way I look at sharing my life experiences with this stuff, not in this like everyone gather round to the summit, to the the summit.
You're up on your up on the stage and your podium. And
God told me that this sound would happen whenever a jaguar that is about to create whatever. So that's how I've looked at that stuff with the podcast, and so I look at it as like it's map sharing, right? Because we're all creating this, as we move through our lives and have our unique set of experiences, and we're creating this map of reality based on our experience, of our cultural reinformation, of our inherited programming from our family and all this stuff. And so we're like going through the territory of the unseen objective world. We're, basically writing down information about impressions of life. What does the landscape look like? What do the interdimensional, interpersonal relationships? What is the human game? What is the human inner life? All these things, and we're writing down all this information, and that's essentially what creates our viewpoint and our point of view of the world. So that's like a map for what reality is like. And I look at sharing these ideas like map sharing. If we all share the map that we have written and so forth throughout our lives, then we can broaden our picture of what our understanding of the world is. And so I would talk about these things because of that on the podcast. And I started getting all of this feedback from listeners saying like, dude, they would say like, I'm experiencing that too. And the way that you talked about it really helped me. It helped me understand what I'm going through, how to get on the other side of it. So chopping down the time that someone is suffering is high on my list.
Can I just pause for a second? Because I've had a shit-eating grin on my face since you started this conversation. It's as if you're describing exactly why I'm doing this podcast. Everything you're saying, it's like the analogy of the map. I love that. Thing that lands greatest for me, and we were talking about Adyashanti before we got on, one of the things that he always talks about is direct experience. Like, what is your direct experience? And that is what your truth is. And you're sharing that. You're not telling people what the truth is. You're saying, this is my experience. And for the same reasons, like I want to tighten up that time frame of suffering for people. I want to share the shitty shit that's going on in my life, and how I've worked through it for me, and how does that, can you sit in my seat and feel those things?
Yes.
So anyway, my grin was about to. I needed a break from a smile. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's
continue.
How I know it's rare. It only happens maybe once a year. But whenever I hang out with someone and the next day my cheeks hurt, that's one of my favorite things in the world. So the other thing, and this speaks to what you were just talking about, is that I realized through that experience that, people say that either, I'm experiencing that too or whatever. Or they'll say, I can't believe, like, how did you know I needed this right now? And that's because both of those things sort of, I began to understand those things more deeply as that I was getting that feedback from my podcast listeners. And I realized that, oh, these aren't me problems. These aren't me issues. These are fundamental human experiences. These are things that are at the root of all of our minds and our experiences as human critters. And so that's why when you see a post on Instagram, like, holy shit, I feel like they're talking about me, or you read something in a book, or me talking about the podcast, where it's like, they're talking to me. It's like, well, yes, because you're human.
Yeah, and because you're real, though, because there's plenty of podcasts out there where it's experts on talking about whatever,
right.
like telling us how to live our life,
right.
not how they're living their life. And I think that stuff is not resonant.
Right.
Maybe you get some information from it, but when you're talking on your podcast and sharing your experiences, people, they feel a vibration.
Right.
There's a deep truth to what you're sharing, and then they reach out to you, and it's just further confirmation that we don't share this enough with others. One of the other reasons for the podcast is to talk about tribe and brotherhood, sisterhood, whatever it means for you. It's how we came together, because we're in the same brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And within that brotherhood, we have the opportunity to share.
Right.
So we also use the podcast. You use your book as a way to continue to share these experiences in order to maybe give people another, like, hey, go share this with someone. You can share it with me. Absolutely. Like, my inbox is always open, but share it with someone close to you and see what happens.
Yeah. And I really try and, like, with the podcast anyway, I really try and get into, in the book too, but all of the things, or a lot of the things that people don't like addressing in this world, I try to address, because I am an open book and honest with all of the ways that I've, like, fucked up with my own experience. And I think that I observe, from my point of view, a lot of basically this stuff doesn't get, it never goes away, and it never is completed, the inward journey. It only becomes finer and more delicate.
Thank you for that. Yes.
And I think that for me,
why don't you repeat that? Because I think that's lost on so many of us that grew up in this achievement paradigm where there is an end goal and we get it. And if we're paying attention when we get it, it's like, fuck, that was short-lived.
Yeah.
Now what? Now what? But what you're talking about is being in a state of being.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I forgot.
For the uninitiated, like, I'd love for you to talk about
Sure. I forgot. I was just making it up. I didn't believe a word of it. No, I was saying that the inward path is I even get a little bit of a cringe calling it the path, but like going into one's own mind and becoming more, having this consciousness amplification around your awareness, beginning to become aware of what you're thinking, how you're acting in the world, what thoughts are you turning into actions, who are you, why are you thinking these things, can you sit close to a feeling to try and understand it, all this type of thing that we're basically just cracking the egg, undoing the self a bit, and once you crack the egg, you can't put it back together, and which is why I like that phrase. It never stops. It doesn't stop because it doesn't stop until life stops, because life doesn't stop. No matter where you get, you're always encountering and absorbing new information and new data and new experiences with different people in different parts of your life. And as you age, you see life differently. Everything constantly is always changing and fresh and new. And that's why I refer to it as the cyclical feedback loop. The cyclical feedback loop is our experiences. We're drawing in an abstraction of the world outside of our skin through our nervous system. It's getting filtered through our own filter bank based upon all of those things, the past experiences and all that. And that's showing up as this tapestry of what reality is. But that's always happening because we're always absorbing new experiential experience, basically notating our illusion, and then feeding back into the world with our response to that information. And that's just this cycle that happens and happens and happens and over. And so it never ends, right? And so basically, as you go inward and begin to try and understand yourself more, then it just gets more, you begin to hack away at it a bit. It gets more delicate and more fine because you've kind of addressed some of the larger, bolder issues, move those out of the way or process them or integrate them or whatever. And it just becomes more gentle and beautiful and delicate and fine, in my opinion, as you get older. And so, yes, there is no finishing place, right? It's just this, if you are willing, and you don't even need to. Another thing I like to stress is that, as you said, this culture of completion, where it's like, you've got to do this and get certified or whatever. Like I was talking to someone who was, a very, very famous person with a huge audience and platform. And I was like, oh, do you meditate? No, yeah, I was certified at this. And I was just like,
yes.
Okay.
I was asking, sure.
Yeah, where it's like, I want to meet the person that certified you, or like, I could certify you with some things. What would you like? Let me tell you how much it costs to get certified at any, whatever you want. It's just nonsense, to certify something about your own consciousness, and so there's a lot of these things, man, that aren't talked about enough, in my opinion, and I like to talk about it. I mean, one of those things that you were talking about earlier is that having a podcast is a really valuable place to be able to share your experiences and this type of thing, share with the people in your life. But also, social media especially has created one of its many symptoms is this. I'm trying to think how to say this artfully. It's a very tricky, slippery hall of mirrors where one can go, I'm going to be really vulnerable and share all this stuff. And the intention of the individual can seem true and good, where they're like, I'm going to really open up and do all this stuff. But ultimately below that, it is being powered by a deep desire for self-focus and attention to try and insulate their insecurity and their true desire, which is ego gratification. And it's like, that's why I like to talk about that type of thing. And also, I am not completely vulnerable, and I don't care. I'm not completely open about my public life or my private life. I mean, and I choose to put up boundaries in my own life with, what I share publicly, because that's healthy. And you need boundaries in your life, right? Brene Brown has this quote that I love that's tattooed in my brain that says, and I wish everyone on social media could read it, is that excessive vulnerability is an act of desperation. Because something becomes a theme online or on podcasts or whatever, and people start really gravitating towards it because they see it works, because it has all the elements our little monkey minds respond to.
All those boxes,
Yeah, where it's like, ooh, I can talk about myself, talk about how much I need to love myself and how I've done this, X, Y, and Z.
Put up some fucking quotes.
Put up some quotes, and then later talk about how great I am now that I've done all of this.
You can just see right through it, too.
So it's good I think it's good to talk about those aspects of that stuff as well, and just be aware of it, because like anything, you can never address any of this stuff without being aware of it. So having an awareness of that dimension of the inward quest is also important.
Yeah, well, it's one of the things, again, the if you're watching, the camera's not going to be on me unless Chris cuts it to me at this point, but I had another smile on my face, because what you're talking about with posting on social media yesterday was International Women's Day or something like that. And I saw some people posting their things, and this has nothing to do with them, but I was earlier in the day, I'm like, my mom's here. I would love to take a picture with my mom, with my wife, Peyton, with my daughter, Hope. And then my niece, Lindsay, was over. I'm like, that would be awesome. And it just was starting to feel like, okay, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
I love them. I don't need to express to it felt like each time I went to initiate it, it felt uncomfortable. I'm like, I'm not doing this because I just truly love them and I feel completely supported by them. I'm doing it mostly to put something out on social media and kind of, a bit of virtue signaling.
Yeah, contrived. That's and it's fine. That's another important thing, is that it's totally fine to, you have this impulse like, hey, I should, get a picture of the family and share it and talk about, # Women's Day. And then when you realize I think I'm not doing that for the right reason. And then discarding that's beautiful. That's the game right there. And even if you, and really the ultimate thing to do, and I imagine you probably did this, was after you had that idea for taking the photo, decided not to, well, how do you want to celebrate Women's Day? Go sit down with them and hang out with them.
Yeah. And
give them your attention.
And there was but what also makes the whole thing a little bit more challenging is back in the monkey mind. Well, everybody's posting about the women in their life, and fucking Cal's not posting about his wife, daughter, mom, niece, sister, whatever. So what does that say about me?
Right.
Oh, I don't appreciate that. And so that can force you to show up in a way that's not authentic.
Yeah.
Because they know that I love them. And if
you can stop there.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah.
And if they have an issue with me not posting, that's their shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless I'm not showing up for them, and I would argue that I am.
Yeah.
Not argue. I would say that I am.
You just demonstrate. That's the thing. Is like embodied. That's like where, I think in male and female relationships, there's often a issue where and not to generalize, but if the female, the woman goes, I would like more of this or X, Y, or Z, in our relationship. And the guy says, well, I just told you why I'll do it. Or I told you why and how I'm doing it. There's a reason that always that's a classic relationship conflict. It's because a woman doesn't care again, not to generalize, but they're looking for actual experience. It's like, and men have a real habit of just like, well, let me intellectualize this and just tell you the thing, and then we're good. It's like, no, go embody it and actually live it and express it so it can be experienced and felt. And that's whenever something's real. And that's a beautiful quality of women,
Yeah. And again, you're speaking to really deeply to my own experience for so many years. And I've spoken about this before, so forgive me if you've already heard this, but I think it's worth repeating. On the outside, I was checking all the boxes for great husband, great dad, great friend.
Mm-hmm.
But what was happening is I was just doing the things. I was not connected deeply in a presence with those actions. I was doing them, and not because I had an awareness that I was just doing them. It's just where I was at.
Right.
And what I finally realized through a lot of challenges that I had with my wife and just a little bit of a disconnect I was having with my kids was that I wasn't letting them into the real me.
Mm-hmm.
And so to your point, exactly, I was doing the things, but I wasn't embodying them. And a lot of that has to do, at least for me, was this armoring and this understanding of how I need to show up as being the rock of the family and the provider and the protector and, providing them with nice things and showing up in that way. And it's for those of you listening to my solo cast, I go deep into that with the experience I had with Peyton at Burning Man that really helped release me for that. And also from some of my best friends where I was showing up in that way, where I felt like there was this old programming in me that said, you need to provide these things for people in order to be loved.
Yeah.
And it was, or some version of that. And I was quickly met with, we love you for who you are. And it was the first time I'd been hearing that before, but it was the first time I was able to actually receive it. And it was, as you would know, it's when you're good with you and you're open and you're not trying to protect the ego, I could receive those messages. And so even though Peyton had said that for a long time, like that she would live anywhere in a tent, wherever with me, as long as she just had me, the version of me, without the stuff. And so anyway, that was, I love that you brought that up. One other thing you talked about that I think is also really important for people, you talked about this kind of taking in this, constantly taking in information and like kind of like iterating. And I think for a long time, I had an experience of things being very black and white and me planting, kind of a flag in the ground about how things were. This is what I believe. I was so much around these belief systems. And I was talking earlier before we got on about just being closed-minded. I think that type of mentality was the antithesis of the idea that you reserve the right to change your mind. And I remember reading Jeff Bezos had made a comment, or it's a kind of a piece about our politicians, like they can't change their mind, or they're flip-floppers,
Right.
or whatever the term is. And once I started to let go of this black and white world, right and wrong, this binary world, and just started to be curious and wonder about things and have ideas about them, but no longer really, I try to be very careful about using the word belief, because that, in my experience, ends all my learning. I just have an idea, that's what I believe, and now, fuck, I got to go defend it.
Yeah.
And so, but what you were talking about, I'd love you to talk a little bit more about that, because I think it would be very valuable for people listening to like what that looks like. Because we're told in so many ways that we're supposed to have an opinion, and that's like for men, fucking you're a strong man. You have your convictions, and you back those up with solid arguments, and it's all bullshit in my opinion. There's a little bit of truth and a little bit of false, or there's some combination of both in everything. And I think that was a new concept for me. And when I finally started to embody that, fuck, was that liberating. And so I'd love for you to just talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Oh, sure. My pleasure. It's one of my favorite topics. It's really, we all have this impression of reality, right? And that includes our belief systems and the way that we see everything, And it's not until you kind of, we were talking before we started recording, a lot of times a traumatic intervention in someone's life will wake them up to the fact that you need something to pop you out of your program.
Just for context, give people what we were talking about.
Oh yes, we're talking about your experience in Las Vegas with the Vegas shooting,
which I think a lot of you, if you've listened to this podcast before, have heard me talk about it, but I've never ever heard it talked about in the context that Cory's about to speak. So if you haven't heard about it, we're not going to get into it today, but it's on the solo cast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're talking essentially about the fact that you had, one program that you were running, one way of seeing the world, a binary, this is A type of reality. And that you were, a part of that shooting, not part of it. That didn't sound good. You were present for that shooting.
Sure.
And, then, afterwards you were trying to integrate, the feelings and all of the kind of emotional and physical fallout that you had from that experience, rightfully so, very traumatic, glad you're okay. And that you were kind of trying to understand why you had this shift in the way that you saw the world. And what I was suggesting was that, we tend to intellectualize or stay in our upper brain, our frontal brain for most of our lives, and what can happen through a traumatic intervention, an event like that, the death of a close loved one, losing, a profession change, you get fired at your job, or someone that takes psychedelics or goes to a silent retreat or whatever, something like that.
How about all those things?
Yeah, all those things. Yeah. Yeah, all of them at once. And what happens is that it changes the human psychology in a very unique way, because what has to happen is that your lower brain, your archaic brain, has to become jolted in a way where you have a physical kind of body reaction to where, in your case, you're at this place, there's an imminent threat, a possible serious threat of being killed, and you have zero control. And in that space, your body, partly as a protection mechanism, but also as a part of being able to just continue processing, it has to release control in the situation as an individual, because you were forced into becoming a part of this collective hive experience. And in that moment, it's that's your lower brain, your monkey brain going, your amygdala and all that stuff getting short-circuited and having this schism where holy shit, I am not in control. And, then you mentioned kind of having this almost a feeling of acceptance around that, And
like a surrender for sure.
yeah, the surrender. And that's often something like that is what happens to kind of hijack or really destabilize the intellectual ego story. And so for you, that seemed to be a oddly transcendent experience, in the afterglow of that experience, because it was something that was unexpected, that was beyond anything you could control, and it pushes you out of this paradigm of the way that you saw reality. And that, cracking the egg thing, after you were out of that, now you're out of this intense situation that you were in, you're back to safety, but you're left with the destabilization. So now then it sounds like to me, what I'm hearing, from what you told me, was that you then began this path to understand, to integrate that destabilization. But the beautiful thing about those experiences, or just any type of destabilizing experience, or consciousness amplifying experience, is that with all things in life, once you know, you cannot unknow. Once you see over the horizon, you can't not know what was over there. And so now you're left with all of this the light of your consciousness was focused white hot on, your professional life and all these, your identity and all these things. This event happens, it expanded that and pushed that further out. And you're left to try and grapple with that new area in your, the flashlight of your awareness. What is this? Who am I? What am I feeling? Why am I? What should I do? What is my real purpose? And that is a useful, if it can go a lot of directions, of course, of how one responds to an event like that. Mm-hmm. And it sounds to me like you've taken it to a very healthy place, but to track it all back to the beginning of kind of where this, where we bifurcated what we were talking about before is, that, we all, hopefully, people will have an experience in their life and where they begin to realize that what they see as what isn't, it just isn't, Mm-hmm. It's just this idea of what life is and what, your values, your belief system, your way of intellectualizing and viewing the world. And it becomes this thing where you mentioned politicians and people who are extremely religious, or just really most people in general. It's biological in a sense that the way that we see the world, this kind of map of our, self and our identity that I talked about earlier, that is so ingrained and wrapped around our ego and how we think of ourselves, right? So how, as people, do we know what we are? Well, we go out into the world, we experience things, we absorb these fragments of different things, and we create this narrative story that we tell ourselves of who we are, what our life is like, what we should do next. And that story is, on a very deep level, what we look at is like, that is us. That is that is what we are as a being. And whenever that thing is challenged, and because that's a story, it's just a narrative, whenever that thing is challenged by external information, someone else with a conflicting viewpoint, a traumatic experience, whatever, and someone with a different political or religious belief, or even something small, So when you're in traffic and someone cuts you off, this is really going to undercut what I was just saying because it's so fucking silly. But one of the, I have this joke in my mind where whenever someone cuts me off in traffic and is like flooring it like a maniac, trying to like cut off 4 people and get on the on-ramp to fly, or they're in line in the grocery store and they're like running past you and cutting you off, I just jokingly assume, I'm like, I hope that they have diarrhea. That's got to be it. That's it. It's not that they're an asshole. It's not that they're blind. They're self-focused. Like, they just got to go. They're flooring it. They're trying to get home. That's what it is, and it makes me laugh.
I love it.
Instead of getting pissed, But whatever the thing is that you experience like that, whenever there is conflicting information that somehow doesn't align with your own personal narrative, a lot of people get viscerally reactive to it, that you get angry. Look at people in politics; they're just constantly yelling at each other all the time. Angry, yeah. And whenever you disagree with someone else, people often get really heated and aggressive. And it's because whenever there is like a part of your subconscious recognizes, like on a logical way, that what the other person telling you is just as a sound type of bit of stance as yours is, but the other elements of the self see that conflicting with the story you tell yourself of who you are. And so that it's as if that conflicting information is literally trying to erase a part of the capital I ego. Because in the story of you, if that is challenged, you don't exist.
We have so much invested in that.
Yeah. And so that's why you see people having these crazy reactions to even their own, whenever someone thinks about something themselves that even doesn't line up with the story they've been telling themselves about themselves for decades, they get angry or they get flustered and shut it down because it's like, oh, well, I'm someone's trying to kill me. I'm trying to kill me. Yeah, I'm erasing the capital I. And so I need to shut it down and to think this one singular way.
Get back on the path.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. I will say this to people listening. I know it may sound heavy and like, what the fuck do I do? But I can assure you that when you get in the right relation with that capital I version of you, none of that really matters. When it shows up and you start to feel like you've got to defend it, you can kind of chuckle at it like, look at me.
This is the moment where people regret having me on their podcast.
No. I just wanted to be very clear about that because I think it's a great point. And I think what you're saying is resonating with a lot of people. Like, oh, fuck, when I'm challenged, there's a part of me that's scared or I defend and do this. But as we create a little bit of space between... Right, between that capital I version, and we can just see it for what it is and its beauty, and it's there to, it's really a loving, it wants to survive, and it's just allowing it to survive, and again, we're kind of getting a little bit off the beaten path here, but if we can just see it for what it is, and again, when we find ourselves defending and kind of puffing our chest or feeling small, having the awareness, and we've talked about this before, but having the awareness around that is huge. And then you can just see it and say, oh, look at me. Look at how silly I'm being right now. Yeah. And it's okay.
Yes.
Part of our existence.
Yeah. And to make things worse.
Yes.
It sounds complex and complicated and, perhaps a bit intimidating what we're talking about. But rest easy because the truth is that reality is an illusion. So it's fine, but it doesn't have to be this crazy like self-detonating type of thing. We're talking about it in broad strokes and whatever, but really it comes down to recognizing that none of us have all of the information, right? Even in its to see those things whenever we're most challenged by them is whenever you're really seeing them. But you can see them in like everything in life pretty much. Think about like, I've tried to let's take it off the person for a second. That way someone can kind of deal with it, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't know everything about reality, even though we kind of tell ourselves a story that we know everything that's going on. So we feel centered and okay and in control. We don't have a psychological collapse. Not good. Not good for the organism or the species. That's why we're designed. We evolved that way, why we've been successful. And so, but if you were say you're at a restaurant and you order a salad or whatever, and there's you comes out and then you stab a fork in there, you pull it up, and then there's like a hair underneath some of those leaves of salad, right? You wouldn't, when that salad was sitting in front of you, you had no concept of the hair. You didn't know it was there, and neither did anyone else, so they wouldn't have brought it out to you. But it was only revealed to you whenever you poked at life and you pulled it back and oh shit, there's the hair, right? And so now that is basically how we are as human critters moving through our entire lives. But we tell ourselves the illusion that we know all, that we know the hair exists, we know everything exists. But everything about us is just us kind of integrating information and deciding that we have this, the right story going on. But whenever you recognize that, oh yeah, there are things that are like off the map of my perception that I then become aware of, like the hair in the salad, then you realize like, oh, all of life is like that, because even your belief systems, it's just information and experience. So other people have different information, different experiences, and their point of view and the way they see the world is just as valid as yours is, and yours is valid. The person, whoever's listening to this right now, like your point of view of seeing the world is beautiful, it's valid, it's important, and it's crucial to you, right? Yeah. As is everyone else's to them. But just recognizing that we all are taking these different entry points into existence, into life, makes it to where you can just lighten up and begin to see things from kind of a multidimensional point of view, where it's like, okay, like things aren't A and A, things aren't A and B, things are actually A and B at the same time. Yes. And how can I learn from that? My way of thinking about myself and the world, and how can I get closer to other people, get closer to truth, get closer to something, the all of the wonderful and beautiful things in life, by having a greater understanding. And in the book, and for anyone listening, none of this stuff's in the book. Relax. No, it is, but it's very simple. It's stated in a way that's easy to swallow. But like, how can we get more attuned to all that stuff? How can we get close to that stuff? And essentially, it allows us to live more present, more open, and ultimately allows us to grow and grow and grow and grow. Because if you don't go around telling yourself that you know everything and because that's someone who says they're a master of something, that's the first step of them ceasing to learn more. And like whenever you go, oh, all right, I don't know what's going on. I know my view of things, but I'm going to be open to, other people's way of seeing the world and recognize that we're both just kind of negotiating and navigating this whole wild thing that none of us really can ever get the quote unquote full picture on. And you can turn that approach to life, this rigid, materialistic kind of single-minded thing that you were describing, into something much more open and something full of equanimity, that just increases. It basically turns it flips the script on this reaction to other information. So instead of seeing an opposing viewpoint and going like, "Oh, I'm gonna dunk on them with my logic," you see it and you go, "Oh, that's interesting. I'm curious about that." That's like me. I think one of the reasons my podcast has been successful is because I have like an insatiable curiosity. Mm-hmm. I want to know and learn and understand everyone else and everyone's way of seeing the things and the way that I see things more deeply and deeply, so that I can get, I can make the world, make myself more like the world as opposed to making the world more like myself. Because we're always out there trying to like shape everyone and make them fit into our paradigm,
Yeah. Oh God, that's a great way to put it. And I have a couple of takeaways. I had a couple more, but you got me thinking about all this stuff. But one, finish the salad, because if you don't, you won't get to that hair. You see the beauty in the hair. Like that's the stuff where when it comes up, it's challenging. Like I didn't know that, but you're going to be fine if you still ate the salad with the hair.
Yeah.
It's all good. But I think one of the other things that keeps coming up for me is we're so entrained to think that everyone sees the world through our own two eyes and our own experience. And it's obviously, it's not the case. We all know that logically, but I don't think we do a good job of really understanding that you and I are in this room and we're experiencing it in two completely different ways. And it's informed also by our entire life experience. And if we want to get really into it, it's like our lineage and ancestors have encoded each of us with different, kind of imprints of how we're taking in the world.
Yeah. It's like we don't even know what's in each other's pockets right now.
Yeah.
Much less each other's minds. You know what I mean?
But and to your point, like we evolved to just make these kind of judgments about whatever it is, my judgments about you and my wife and this, just so we can actually live in the world without trying to figure everything out.
Yeah, existential paralysis. That's what will get you. You got too far. Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things you pointed out that I really want to, kind of highlight, our entire lives generally we're seeking answers. We're in the school system, I think, is a great example where we're rewarded for regurgitating, for memorizing other people's ideas and answers.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're talking about is the opposite of that. Is the real magic is in the quality of the questions and in curiosity and wonder.
Yeah.
And that's why you're successful with your podcast. And that's why people listen to it, because you're digging deeper and deeper, not because you have come in with a certain set of beliefs around something. You bring someone on, just like you're on here today with me. Like, I just want to, tell me what's in your mind, share it with me and the listeners, and let's see what happens. Like,
Yeah.
we don't need to believe anything. And I think for me, it probably happened a year ago. I had this aha moment. Like, I don't fucking know anything, like, of substance. Like, I don't really know anything. And it just, a fucking big sigh of relief, and the shoulders relax. And it's like, oh, I don't have to know anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it allowed me to take in information in a completely different way. And what feels true when someone talks about it, I don't have to believe it, but if it's like, oh, I like the way that sounds, I'm going to try that out for a little while. And maybe it's a mindfulness practice.
Right.
Like, that sounds good. I'm going to try it out. Maybe I like it. Maybe I don't. But it's just taking in other people's information, seeing how it fits with you, and then not being attached to it one way or the other, just kind of moving on through life.
Right. It's good to just, I think, I have become much more of a witness, in the way that I experience life. Also, all the while enjoying just the weird, wrinkles of my own brain, and that's a project to me in itself. Like, I feel kind of also at the same time, like, I'm do that to myself. I'm constantly in that state of doing that to me too. I'm like, it's weird that where is that coming from? Like, I'm having model agnosticism in my own brain too. You can really take it wherever you want, and also that this links to something we were talking about earlier, as far as this, the path of inner undoing, unlearning.
Well played. Yes. Nice plug.
Where it gets finer and more delicate as it unfolds. But in our culture of, like, comparison, and of, like, you need, a Rolls Royce, you need whatever it is to be successful. That's the sign of success in our life. You need power, you need, wealth, or, an audience, or fame, or whatever it is, that it creates, it's a bit of a symptom of capitalism. And it creates this thing where people think you have to, like, be better than the next person, go further and further and further than the next person to prove that and it's also, part of it is a male quality as well. Like, well, I need to be, stronger than that guy, or more successful than that guy, or whatever. But I think a crucial thing to understand is to, like, forget all about that and realize that with the inward exploration, the inward path, you only need to go where you need to go. To me, I have, throughout my own life, have really tried to go to the Mariana Trench, with things, because that's what I needed to try and understand.
What does that mean?
Oh, that's like the deepest trench in the ocean.
Okay.
So it's like the lowest point in all of the ocean floor.
Okay, nice.
It's like, that's where I needed to go to try and understand, myself and whatever. But it wasn't pretty,
Yeah.
But if you only need to, if meditating for 5 minutes a day is what makes you feel happy, and removes those feelings of, disconfiguration or whatever, then that's beautiful. That's all you need. And that's important to know, because I think I've, experienced a lot of people like, oh, this has to be your identity. You have to now become this person that's like, oh, I'm this person, the spiritual person, or I'm the whatever. That's all bullshit. That's a part of the problem. Like the whole, like, oh, I'm this person now, and now my whole group of friends are all quote unquote conscious people. And all. It's like, you're just basically swapping out one identity paradigm for another. Yeah. To me, the deepest people I know, you would never guess, you'd never see it coming. Like our friend Kevin, like Kevin Kaiser, like, he's an unassuming, seems and looks like a normal fella, until you talk to him. And they're like, oh, wow, this guy's special. But he's not, he doesn't have 50 pounds of mala beads on and wearing flowing, clothing and whatever. But, and that's, I think it's a good example of like, yeah, just do it for you to make it where your inner life feels balanced and you feel fulfilled and present. Because, and this is, something in the book is like, at the end of the day, peace is patience and understanding. Peace is patience in the sense that we're always rushing to try and, grasp at life and grab at life and make, as I was saying earlier, make the world more like us and further insulate our own way of seeing things and whatever, and trying to achieve in a material and a status sense or an attention sense or whatever it is. But what comes from that way of thinking is that we then are always attacking life, grabbing at it, rushing to do this, rushing to do that. And in that, peace evaporates because you're always in this sort of, you're in this hunting mode all the time, And the beauty, the presence comes from being able to, as you mentioned earlier, put space between that type of seeking and attacking type of mindset and simply being for a minute and feel what it feels like to just exist without any of those programs running. And that's where peace can be found, is in that place of just presence and witnessing what is. And once you're able to witness what is and kind of get into accord with what is, then that's whenever you can begin to really flow with it and just be in that zone, and that's where a beautiful place of presence and peace can be found.
Yeah, and I want to just be clear for people listening that you're not saying don't drop the hammer on something when you see it. Like there's just don't let that be your only shot in the bag.
Yeah, of course.
Like have that presence of mind where you can just exist, and when it's time to go, white hot focus on something, go do that.
Yeah, exactly.
But have it be nuanced.
Yeah.
One of the other things you brought up was this comparison idea, and it was something that's been something that I struggled with for a long time. And the Teddy Roosevelt quote that comparison is the thief of joy really lands for me. And I think once you step outside of that, and again, look around at what people are doing to get ideas what may feel good. Like we're not saying just get in your own, put the blinders on and just do your own thing. Like, no, pay attention. Like, what's Cory doing that's working for him? Like, maybe I'll try that. Or what did he do that's not working for him?
Right.
Well, maybe it'll work for me.
Yeah.
So try those things out, but don't be married to it. And I think this is a fucking huge problem. Again, this is one of the main reasons I stepped into this medium, and because, why I'm going to get into coaching is because there's so much out there in social media with the marketing and all this of like, go do these things, follow my path, do exactly these 10 things, and you'll be successful and you'll be fulfilled and you'll be fill in the blank. And it's all bullshit. That's someone else's framework they used. Get up at 4:30 in the morning, go run 18 miles. Don't eat until 8 o'clock at night. Like, first of all, most of it's probably bullshit, but like, don't like go. Actually, before I say don't follow, go follow them. Go do that, because I've done that. I've tried to follow in those footsteps, and it wasn't until I did that enough and fell on my face enough and felt shitty about what I was able to do and not able to do because so-and-so is doing that and they're successful. Once I finally realized that it's all bullshit and that's not me, that's them or allegedly them, then I just started like, what the fuck do I need? What works for me and in me alone? And how does that, color how you move forward in the world when you no longer have attachments to having to be in a certain way because that is what someone is public facing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, all of the systems and all that stuff are really just mainly it's a lot of marketing. People really you look at a lot of the books that are out there, or a lot of podcasts are like brands of people, and they're all very simple systems, or they're systems that are easy to extract the information from the bullet points, and that really is attractive to people because you think about most people are going through life They're trying to pay the rent. They're trying to make sure their kids have dinner and get to school. They're trying to, relax for an hour at the end of the day. They're trying to get enough sleep, and they're trying, it's just grinding and grinding. And they get into this automated sort of flow of stuff. And then they peripherally, when they look at their phone or they see someone talking about something, this person has like, well, here's the 10 bullet points of how you can change your life. Like, oh man, that's all I have time for, because life is overwhelming. It's just tough getting by, and maybe that'll be useful to me, so I'll try some of that stuff. And so that's why people are really attracted to their really simplistic sort of generalized sort of systems for quote unquote success. But as you said, because of ultimately at the end of the day, it's a symptom of how our country is founded upon. One of the things is like marketing. America is in the business of making things famous. That's one of the American superpower. And like, look at culture, movies, Hollywood, all that stuff. A lot of it's generating from America, and the rest of the world looks to America for what's happening. And, because of that, the marketing aspect of America is so deep. And so all of us are told from the time that we're born that like everywhere we look, even if you're, no matter what age you are, either it was on TV and between your favorite programming, there's commercials saying, oh, if you buy this, this Ram truck that's coming up over the side of a mountain with like, Bob Seger playing or whatever, then you'll be, badass. And people are like, oh, okay. And then, there's all these things. It's a constant, everywhere you go, you get these shoes, like this person or whatever. You wear the Nike outfit like that person. You do this, you get rich like this person. You're going to be, okay, you're going to be complete. You just need to buy this thing. And it's all so deeply psychologically kind of like it's designed to really be vampiric to our souls and our psychology, so that we'll respond. It's all, there's boardrooms full of psychiatrists and behavioral, therapists going like, okay, well, we need to hit this point and this point and say this thing and have this camera angle and have this person wearing this to evoke this reaction from the viewer, from like, we'll be able to hit 70% of the population. That's our demographic by doing this thing, and we'll have this reaction, and we'll be able to get this amount of conversion from that thing and make this amount of money. So great, let's do that. It's all designed like that. And the more that you actually learn about that stuff in the back end, it's really terrifying and evil and reptilian. I learned a lot about that, even just publishing the book. But, so we all grow up in that. And especially, also with, think about cosmetics in the industry. It's like, you aren't pretty unless you wear all of the, you contour your face every day and all this stuff. And it's like, because of we all grow up in that, it's all so deeply planted in our minds. That's where this big feeling of not enoughness comes from in a lot of ways. We're constantly told like, we got to buy this and do this to feel okay and feel complete. You know what I mean? And so a lot of kind of what you're talking about earlier, man, is that, people get on this path of like feeling like they need to acquire and like do this thing and follow that. I need to, if I'm not doing that bullet pointed list, I've failed, and it's because of me. And that's where the real rub comes in, is our inner critic flares up. So you try like, I'm going to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and eat, only meat or whatever. I eat 4 pounds of meat at 8 p.m. and, and like whatever it is. And I, run 20 miles a day, and I take, 30 Epsom salt baths and whatever it is. And that's my thing. And then because that's unrealistic and it's not organic, it doesn't match human life. Then whenever it's enough to get you to buy the system to hope that it'll work, but then it's not real. And so it doesn't work. And then you feel like a failure because, of just the kind of collective psychological damage that that America has. So we feel like, oh, that was because of me. But that also, what's fucked up is that's why marketing continues to work. Yeah. It's because it's like, it's selling us the poison and then telling us that making us believe that we're the reason that the thing didn't work, not the thing itself.
Yeah, fuck. And what you're talking about, this whole notion, it comes back to us being cut off from our intuition and our inner knowing.
Mm-hmm.
We take in this stuff, we try all these steps, it doesn't work, we blame ourselves. Or rather, I mean, we could take that information, okay, let's take it for a test drive, let's see how it feels. And when it doesn't work, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, we try to pack all these things on, and it's not us. And I think if we just have an awareness around that, and so when we're trying things, whether it's getting in a cold shower, if that feels really good and you want to go deeper, go into a cold plunge. And if that doesn't work, then go to the cold shower. And if that doesn't work, then don't fucking do it.
Right, exactly.
You don't have to
Not
do
for
it.
you. Yeah.
Just because some person with 500,000 followers is doing it and they have a lot of, I talked about it, sure. Like I talk about it to say, look, I like doing this. It's a fucking pattern interrupt for me in the morning.
Yeah.
It wakes me up. And you know what? I don't do it every morning. Some mornings I wake up, I'm like, I don't want to fucking do it. And so I don't do it. And I don't think I'm a pussy for not doing it. It's just like, you know what? I'm okay with all that.
Yeah. And speaking of your 500,000 followers that might convince someone to do an ice plunge, Facebook has litigated against IGaudit.com, which shows you how many of those people have purchased followers and have fake followers. So Facebook actually sent IGaudit.com a cease and desist and said that if they put the site back up, that they'll sue them, into beyond bankruptcy, because they don't want the veil being lifted, because so many people online, most people that have those amount of followers, it's fake followers. They've purchased followers because there's all these systems where you can just buy 10,000, 100,000, how many ever you want, how many you want to pay for. And then what happens is it's just a classic marketing technique where others see, like, if you see a taco stand with 2 people and a taco stand with 100 people, it's like, well, that one must be the shit.
Fuck, man. I still fall for that,
But the one thing that will never let you down is what you were just talking about, is putting a beat. And this is a lot of why, people ask me why I call, my book, it's an unconventional approach to modern mindfulness. Well, what's modern about it? What's all the things we're talking about? A lot of the great books on mindfulness and living more present are wonderful, but they were written 30, 40, 50 years ago.
So true, yes.
So it's bringing these ideas because in that time, there's so many more problems. Even in the last 5 years, the amount of new problems and things we're facing as people have emerged, that applying those ideas and new ideas to what we're facing today, right? And so in a lot of this stuff, what I call the mindfulness gap in the book is a thing you can develop through just the cultivation of internal space. And by that, I mean disrupting this reactionary way of living, right? Where you were talking about, like, getting into the zone of like, oh, I'm going to do this and do this and do this and do this. You need to, meditation is a really useful tool for that. Or just, there's a plethora of ways you can do it, but having that space where you begin to recognize what you're thinking, taking a beat, putting a pause before you respond to that email, before you click buy on that thing, before you say something to someone that you care about or someone that you don't care about. How are you showing up in as many instances of your life as possible? How can you be a better father? How can you, all this type of stuff, like just having this moment of like, okay, instead of just doing that and then perhaps regretting it later or seeing like, oh, that's weird, I wish I would have thought more about that. Mm-hmm. Having this moment of like, let me just take a breath and sit and think about like what's coming up. Well, what am I thinking? That's a weird thing that most people don't think, even they don't register. It's like, what am I thinking right now? And why am I thinking that? And perhaps what could I do to, does that serve my integrity or my values in this situation? And I don't mean you don't have to get crazy granularized with it where you're like at a coffee shop and you're like, what are my values when I order this espresso? But it's like, but just as a general theme in life, having a bit more space to where you're responding to your life with intentionality, as opposed to just reacting based on the outside forces that are trying to control you and your inherited behaviors from your past experience.
Well, it's like when there's a trigger, when you're triggered, take that pause. Like what's, as you said, look, what's coming up for me? Why is what my wife just said to me, why does that make the hair on the back of my neck stand up? What is it about my 2 kids? Like 2 of my kids, we played basketball last night and they're just kind of on each other. And And for me, it's like on some level, I'm like, okay, they're fine. No one's going to get hurt, but they're at each other. And it's the energy of the two of them. And it's that it triggers something for me. And so every now and then I'll be like, just stop it, you two. But I think where I would love to get to is to just be in a state of allowing it to happen and understand, why does that trigger me?
Yeah.
What is it? What does it bring up for me that makes me so uncomfortable that I just want to nip it in the bud?
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to hurt one another. And if they do, they'll be fine. Maybe someone will learn a lesson, but like last night, it was just like, it makes my skin crawl. It's like, just fucking stop. And I'm completely reactionary. And so that gives me something to think about. Like, what is it that brings that up for me?
Well, unnecessary complexification is really irritating to humans.
Yes.
So if you think about it in the sense that we can remember one number very easily. Mm-hmm. If someone told you 3 numbers, easy. If someone tells you 40 numbers to remember, rarely anyone will be able to remember that. And we would get flustered trying to remember that, and it would be irritating. Well, just look at all of the elements in life where that same thing's happening. It's because you feel out of control of the world outside of you, because it's too much. It's too overwhelming to have a hand and be able to control. So in that moment, for example, whenever your kids, essentially what's happening is they're individuating in a Jungian sense. So they have their roles in your family structure and system. And by getting at each other like that, they're basically playing the lowest level of the animal game. They're trying to establish themselves in the power dynamic of the family, the dynamic of attention from you. They're also testing you by acting out, to see if like, oh, can I get away with this? Can I do this? How's he going to respond to this? Will this get me attention? Do I care if it's negative or positive attention? It's just a natural, part of the human psychological growth section. All of us do it as we get older. We start just, trying to find our place in the world and test the different boundaries of what that is, right? So they're individuating for power dynamics on this cute little micro level.
Too fucking cute last night for me.
Yeah.
No, but I love that.
And then noise, it's frustrating to you because it's a level of complexity that's unnecessary and it's out of your control, and they're testing you at the same time, right? And so having that internal space can be really valuable, because instead of, you can feel that frustration, and that's, a lot of people go like, oh, well, I feel that I'm a bad person because I feel angry or irritated whenever you're in that situation.
Yes, right.
And that's the inner critic that we're all designed to hate ourselves, you know? And you're like, maybe if I buy some new sneakers, I'll feel, and then you open Facebook and it's got an ad for new sneakers, That's called computational inference, by the way. It's a very evil algorithm that Google and all those things use. So anyway, that's another rabbit hole. But getting back to the point, so instead of doing that, recognizing like, okay, I'm feeling this way. That's totally fine. It's a natural way to feel. But what you do with it is what creates who you are and what's important. So you have that arising feeling of like frustration. And instead of taking it out on them, some people would smack their kid, or they would yell.
I did not.
Yeah.
I did not at all.
Or they would yell at them or whatever.
I may have done that.
Then you can realize that that's arising and then see it, go, okay, instead of going like, I'm going to let that out and have the teapot explode, go, okay, what am I feeling right now? I'm feeling frustrated. Why am I feeling that way? Well, it's because this is annoying and they're fighting. But now how can I change this in a deeper level? Like, how can I kind of address the situation? And so I don't have kids. So
it's back to like me trying to conform
the
world to my...
Right.
That's what I was trying to do last night.
Yeah. You're like, won't you both come and sit on the couch next to me while I have a bourbon and be quiet? Like that's what you need to be doing, because that's what I want you to do right now, But instead of you can tell them to chill and to disengage. And if they don't, then bring in positive things, like change the focus, get them out of that individuation game to other things, and like let's contextualize this social agreement and interaction right now, move on to something else, and change the focus from that nipping at each other to like getting into something more constructive or just kind of a different storyline, you know?
Yeah, and again, what you said earlier, pause, take a beat, like create space instead of reacting. And it's there's a little saying that you familiar with Peter Crone?
Yeah, who's that? It rings a bell.
He's considered like a mindset architect. He was on Aubrey's podcast,
Okay.
on Kyle's, soon to be on mine. One of the many pieces of wisdom he shares is asking yourself, can I be with this? And I found myself when I've been uncomfortable with the way something is playing out in front of me. It's like, can I be with this? Can I just be in a state of allowing this to happen? And I think last night would be a really good example. If I would have had the awareness that was a trigger coming on, and maybe next time I will take a breath and say, can I just be with this? Because there's no danger.
Mm-hmm.
There's absolutely no danger. That's a different scenario, obviously, and that's very, rare that it would get to that. But I think just taking that moment and asking the question, can I be with this? And I think, it has served me well in the past, and I think I just didn't have it, didn't have that at my fingertips last night.
Right. And also the other, thing is that whenever someone, no matter what the scenario is in life, maybe they're at their job and they get, pissed off. Like I know someone that was telling me they work in the service industry, and they were finding that they started playing this game because they find themselves every time someone doesn't tip to get like a to-go order, they'd be like, dude, we're still making everything and working here, and that's probably an issue of perspective more than anything. The person that's placing the order is thinking like, well, I'm not being waited on, so, not really that big of a deal. But to someone in the service industry, they're like, we're still doing a lot of work, so, even something would be useful, in finding that like irritation, right? So, I mean, whatever the situation may be in your life, or you could be in an office and, whatever the scenario. Even if you continue to have that reaction and that response and you do flare up and get pissed off, it's no big deal, right? It's fine. Like it's not failing, because we again, we're just, it's pounded into our brains that if we're trying to improve ourselves or to be happy, how dare we try and be happy, and we mess up one time, it's like, well, that's the end of the story. Put a period on it. You are a terrible person for the rest of your life. You failed. Better stop now. No, it's like we're all imperfect. We're just silly monkeys, hairless apes, float some more than others.
Yes.
Shuffling around on a planet floating in the middle of infinity, trying to figure out what's going on. We are aliens that have inhabited some weird, bizarre, foreign rock out in the middle of nothingness. Give yourself a break. It's weird. This is weird that we're here.
Thank you.
None of us are perfect.
Really fucking weird.
Yeah. And so like, yeah, we're going to mess up. We're going to get off track. And also sometimes we're under more pressure than others, and sometimes we're not, And so sometimes you'll be able to manage it and do what you would hope to do in a situation. Sometimes you're not going to be good at it and you're going to act in a way, but it's all about, you do the best that you can. And then in the situations where you didn't do what you wanted to do, you learn from it. You go, okay, well, that sucked. I was a real asshole right there. I wish I wouldn't have done that. And I'm going to just keep that in mind. And next time I'm going to continue trying to do it. And if it's a really bad situation, perhaps like with your wife or something like that, then you can actually go and communicate about it later. And that's a part of like, that's where real vulnerability, not being on Instagram, talking about, just vomiting all of your stuff all over everyone so that you'll get likes.
Yeah.
It's like real vulnerability is going, hey, to your wife, I'm really sorry that I was being an asshole or whatever last night. I apologize. And I, take responsibility for it. And I really didn't mean to do that. And I'm sorry, I love you or whatever. That's how I always say. I always say I love you or whatever. No, or I say... Or I say, in that. And I think that's really huge. And this just comes from countless emails. So in that same area, whenever we feel something arising, and say step one is you get to where you feel the thing, the frustration, coming to that situation. You feel the irritation, and you learn how to observe it, most of the time as it arises, and then let it go. And that's a huge part of mindfulness, right? Is feeling those negative emotions, and then learning how to stop them before they explode out into the world, or you take them out on someone else or yourself, and just allow them to okay. Like last night, if you would have got all that frustration, and then you pause, you go, okay, I'm just going to let that go, and I'm going to approach this a lot more calmly with a bit more compassion and awareness. So that's great. Step one, beautiful. If anyone can do that, your life will improve tremendously. Step two, the thing that people generally come around to after gaining some good control of that, or discipline or practice or whatever at that, is then they go, now I'm good at feeling frustration and irritation and anger arise and letting it go. Now I feel resentment. So now I resent the fact that the other people in my life are doing all this stuff, and I'm the one that's just letting it. They're still getting pissed at me. They're still, bickering and snapping at me, but I'm the one that's taking all of the burden. I'm the one that's allowing things to pass through. I'm the one that's trying to be patient and more developed and more aware. And now everyone else is just carrying on mindlessly. And now I'm starting to get resentful towards the rest of humanity because I'm, trying to do this work and no one else is. Well, that's a thing that I have heard a lot. People ask me oh, what do I do now? I'm in the kitchen. I'm figured out how to let go of the anger, but now I'm really resenting, my partner or whoever. And that is, then you turn that into communication. So that's step two, right? So once you develop a bit of mindful muscle where you can, deal with that situation, you can then turn it into a thing where you can communicate with the person from a mindful way, that you're let them know the feeling that you're feeling, and then talk to them and let them know okay, so we were in this situation, I felt this frustration or this anger or whatever might be arise, and then be able to kind of peacefully and calmly and with a sense of awareness and clarity tell them, not tell them, but converse with them as to why that was happening. And then that's where real kind of growth can come from on both parts. Because a lot of people think that you, in those situations, you need to go change someone else, right? That you need to okay, I'm figuring this out, and now because I have figured this out, now you need to fall in line with my new level of awareness or whatever it is. And that's just a type of control, that one is placing on things. And you can't force someone to learn and to have these kind of aha moments. The only way that you can get someone to grow and to grow with you and to help them is by, in those moments where there was frustration or whatever, and it comes up, and you begin to communicate it to them in a, peaceful and, way that has some patience involved and some perspective. Then through that communication, they will go, that's how they can begin to kind of grow themselves, the people around you in your life system, because you can't just go, hey, have these aha moments, because none of us realize things from the outside in. We all have to realize everything from the inside out, Mm-hmm. So whenever you're having those moments of frustration, you communicate to someone in a calm and a way with clarity and with good intention. There's this multi-layered thing where people, you can, like you were talking about with the Instagram photo, where you wanted to post this picture for Women's Day, and then you sort of felt that little cringe, that little that feeling, that's a good, interesting layer to be aware of, because even if someone could patiently and peacefully go be talking to their partner and say hey, I just wanted to tell you, this situation happened or whatever, in the way that, what you said or kind of what you did, I felt this way about it. That same ego game on layer number 2, you can go, oh, this is a good way for me to talk about this thing, but also subtly be turning some weird knife or some deep silent, unsaid attack or something that, people do that type of thing a lot. And you can pay attention to like, where is this communication coming from? And just make sure to keep it from a place of integrity and just positive, true intention. Anyway, so whenever you can communicate that thing to your partner, whoever it is in your life that has that, that is creating that frustration that you're passing through, you tell them, what's going on, and then that's how they can then grow as well. Because a lot of times, people that are in your life that are doing the things that are causing you to feel frustrated or feel angry, that you're having to pause and try and let go and not react to, it's just coming from unawareness. They're not doing it because they don't like you or because they want to piss you off or whatever. They're just in their little bubble reality, their little flashlight, in their map of the world, doing their thing. And we all do it. It's unavoidable as a human. And just learning that and knowing that and trying to bring compassion on behalf of everyone, not just yourself, is a way that we can help each other, help each other kind of heighten our awareness and find that good, peaceful zone together.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's really useful. Start with yourself, as you said. When have you been lacking awareness? When have you had unconscious behavior? You probably don't have to look too far in your past to find that, and just realize that we all have instances of that. Some people are living their lives largely unconscious. It's not by choice. It's just where they're at. And so, and along those same lines, I think we were talking about this before we got on, the fact that I have an awareness about what happened last night is a step in the right direction, because there was a time when that I would just say, those fucking kids, man, why can't they get along? Where it's not about that. It's about, why can't I be in a state of allowing that to happen? Not to say you just want your kids to act like assholes or whatever, but like, just see it for what it is. Just this thing that, as you said, they're individuating in their different ways. So anyway, I want to, because I teased to it in the beginning, I want to talk a little bit about binaural beats. And
Sure.
I had a few other questions that I think you'd alluded to it earlier, about being on the rock, spinning through infinity.
Oh,
and
yeah.
all that. And so I'd love just to blow some minds with your ideas around that.
Sure. That's.
But can you explain binaural beats to people?
Yes, I can. That'd be hilarious if I just got up and ran out of here. I know I can't. Yeah. Basically, it is music, sounds that are used to get your mind into certain states. And so ultimately, the idea is that our brain, the way that our brains are always firing. So when we have thoughts, our neurons are sending electrical signals through synapses to each other. So our brain's made of neurons, and to have thoughts and brain activity, it's sending electrical signals to each other. Those signals, that electrical signals, they flow in waves typically. And that's what we hear, brain waves, right? So you hear someone talk about your brain wave states, your delta state, your gamma state, that's like a flow state. So
tell us, can you explain what the different states are?
Yeah. So not to bore anyone, basically there's gamma, theta, beta, delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. So that's like low to high. Okay. And so, for example, flow state, like peak athletic performance or something like that, is like a gamma state.
Okay.
The lowest state, like a delta state, would be sleep or a deep meditation or something like that. So because they flow in waves, you think about a wave, it's moving in a certain length, right? So I'm trying to make this as like least technical as possible.
Sure.
So think about everyone knows what the inside of like a yin yang symbol looks like, that wavy line, right? So imagine if that wavy line, if the ripples were closer together, or if they were further apart. So the wave has a bigger crest and a bigger trough, or a smaller crest or a smaller trough. Mm-hmm. So deeper squiggle or faster squiggle, right? So that's the speed of these brain waves, these electrical, waves firing in our minds. So sound also travels in waves, right? And sound is literally, air being disrupted, moving through space. And so the idea is that so the gamma waves in our minds are moving very fast, no surprise. Delta waves are moving a lot more slow. So the fact that they have a speed, they have a defined frequency, right? So generally they'll say that, gamma waves are, this frequency, delta waves are this frequency, and all in between. And so the idea with binaural beats is that there are long form pieces of sound, kind of like ambient music that you would use, that like I call it like functional ambient music. And so they're really long tracks, sometimes half an hour. Sometimes I just release some that are 2-hour long tracks.
We'll link to all this stuff in the show notes,
cool.
folks.
And so the concept with them is that you put on headphones, binaural. So bi means two, neural is sound, right? So binaural. In one ear, they're playing one frequency. There's one tone, like a The other ear, there's a different tone or frequency. And the difference between those two frequencies in each ear matches up with the desired brainwave state.
So what would the numbers be, for instance? Like this frequency is this number, and that one's this, and it equals this.
Yeah, well, it's not so much about the specific frequency itself. It's about the difference between the two frequencies. Okay. But there's a lot. You can really you can make it really complex with a lot of other stuff that will bore people to death. But basically, so you'll get the difference of the tones enough to where they match. Like for example, 3 hertz difference between tones is like a delta delta beating sound, which would sound like wow, 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 right? Mm-hmm. For someone on a piano or something, you think about you hit a white key and a black key right next to each other and it has that kind of buzzing sound, that like meh sound. That's those two tones of those two piano notes rubbing against each other because they're 2 separate tones. They're close to each other and they're both vibrating because they're hitting each other and they're kind of, that's called beating. That's the binaural beats. So if you have 2 frequencies that are similar but are close, they try and match up with each other, but they start vibrating because they're close enough to create this kind of stimulus type of effect, right? So the binaural beats, the idea with them is brain wave entrainment. So if you were to try and get your brain into this flow state or want to get your brain into this relaxed, deep meditative state, then you would listen to a binaural beat which had those tones in them, delta waves or gamma waves or whatever. And then the idea, the concept behind them is that then your brain basically becomes entrained by those frequencies and your brain waves start making up the difference in that, the 2 tones that are playing in your ears. And thusly it puts your whole, brain into that brainwave state. Mm-hmm. There's a decent amount of science around it. And I'm working with some Australian universities that are doing studies like fMRI scans and stuff like that, using my music as test material and so on. But at the end of the day, I'm not a scientist, and but what I can say is that I've just experimented with them for years and years, and I found them to be effective. And my background as a music producer. And also simultaneously, being a composer and also having a lifelong inward quest and fascination with consciousness, put in a position to where mine, it's like, I don't know if you've experienced this in life, but like some of the things became a big part of your life you would have never even wanted or thought of, but it was this bizarre nexus point of opportunity and this door opened and you're like, interesting, I'm going to walk through that. Like makes a lot of sense, and then it becomes this huge thing. That's where a lot of my successes have been like I would have never have thought about being like a world-renowned binaural beat creator. Like I wouldn't have set out and be like, that's what I'm going to go do. It just like happened,
Well, it's a great lesson. People pay attention to like the things as they're unfolding in front of you. What are you drawn to do? If you didn't put a pin out there and say, this is where I'm going. Yeah. It's binaural beat land. It just happened and you continue to just trust, I'm guessing, your intuition that this was the path for you. And it probably came really easy given all, I don't mean the work itself is easy, but the decisions were really easy because everything just seemed to align. Everything seemed to conspire to make this path very clear for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very natural. And it was like whenever the first set that I made, the first volume was, I was like, oh, this is like everything I've experienced in my life has prepared me to make the most awesome binaural beats ever, because I have a lifelong exploration of consciousness, all of the inner work, the philosophies and ideas around mind and consciousness, the experiences to have an awareness of when my consciousness is shifting, whatever I can tell whenever my mind is changing, I can feel it in real time. I'm aware of caffeine flowing in and out of my body whenever I'm feeling more and like closer to reality, whenever I feel the back of my mind start chattering more thoughts, whenever there's different strands of subconscious turning into threads of conscious thought in the back of my mind. I'm always aware of that type of stuff. And musically, from a composer point of view, all of my own music, just recreational music that I've made, what I would consider just artistic, it's all dealt with ways to manipulate the listener's perception to give a sense of timelessness and spaciousness, the notion of like listener expectation and things like that, and musical sleight of hand is what I call it, and ways to psychologically affect someone who's listening to a piece of music. That's what all my music has been about anyway. And so it's like taking all of that along with some brain science and awareness of consciousness, and then the intention of creating something for a certain thing, all lined up to give me a toolkit to make very impactful binaural beats. And I found what's interesting, I made a bunch of volumes. I've made kind of the first two collections I released just through Aubrey and licensed to Onnit. And then I then made binaural beats for meditation, which are on my site. Also, then a lot of people requesting that I make some for psychedelic journeys. And I called that binaural beats for deep work, because I'm not into the idea of I wouldn't want to suggest that someone do some ceremony or something like that. I want someone to come to that themselves. But ceremony or deep work certainly isn't only with some assisted type of chemical component. You could meditate for them. You could get in a float tank with them. You can have a darkness retreat with them, or whatever it might be. So the binaural beats for deep work, and those were really popular. And I just released some last week, again due to requests, called binaural beats for sleep. So those are the 2-hour long ones.
Sure. I've used those. I just got the email from you last week about those, but I've used those before, and they've been really useful for me in napping, or if I just can't get to sleep at night, just throw, obviously the different one on for the deeper sleep. I've also noticed them obviously with some of Joe Dispenza's meditations that have helped sink me into a new state as well. Now, there are a few other things that I definitely wanted to get to. Before we get off the book, one of the things, just for the listeners, I think some more actionable steps. One of the things I particularly enjoyed was your thoughts around our daily routines. And how you said these are not chores, these are gifts. And what I noticed, I'd love for you to talk about those, but what I noticed, a lot of these things are very restorative. They're very kind of that working in nature. And even you talked about when you go out for a run, which is, I think most people would throw in the working out category. You've layered in this working in principle of like getting into that flow state and just letting things come through. And so I'd love just, I am going to recommend that people get the book. We will, when this episode comes out, we'll do a giveaway. We'll give out some copies, but, and we'll obviously link to all this stuff in the show notes, but just, we're going to give you a little sampler here of what some of the actionable steps are. Yeah,
sure. So as far as the running goes, I mean, I just feel like, every aspect of consciousness, whenever you're awake, and not in the metaphysical sense, but just whenever you're online as a person, that's an opportunity to have a deeper, rich human experience. And I don't, as I think we covered somewhere in the middle of this podcast, categorization is not some, I feel like, structures and categorization that way are just kind of limiting, and they can be useful for some people. But I like to have everything be layered and intermingled and multidimensional. So I look at like every experience as it's a potential to get deeper into it and to get something else out of it and to find some level of beauty and as you mentioned, kind of this gift quality of those things. So some people see like working out, like, well, this is the time where I close off a part of my brain, go to the gym, do what I got to do, and then leave. And that's cool if that's what someone needs to do. But to me, I don't know. I'm like, well, this is just another aspect of existence. And I'm going to I'm curious, like, where can I find something else, the presence and kind of the magic and the connectivity and a different frequency of flow in my running, And so I began to see running as this form of meditation almost, to where it's just a perspective shift of what your resting state of awareness can be. And to me, it's like, all right, now instead of sitting and having just an intellectually present sense of being, now this is an active sense of connectivity and awareness, to where I'm feeling the body lock in, the legs move and touch the ground, and like smelling the all of the sensory experience of the grass and the trees and the cars that go by, and hearing everything that flows, and like observing the landscape of everything I'm passing by, and just turning it into this. Also, the exercise element is very useful because you're kind of forced to think about a thing because it's active. That's like why walking meditation is a popular well known type of meditation in the East, because it gives the mind a thing to it kind of satiates the monkey mind a bit. It gives the background mind that always wants to tinker, something to do, and then allows you to kind of let go above that. And running, it can be useful, or working out can be useful for that. Because you're sort of like, okay, you're forced to focus on the road or the whatever that is so that you don't fall. So like you can use that as like, all right, this is where I'm like training my focus and attention here. And then let's go deeper into that. So like unfold the layers of that forced focus and attention to a broader, more nuanced type of experience. That's how I think about running. And it's not, just to be clear, it's not some ridiculous, like, overly romantic sense of, I'm not like, time to do my running meditation. It's a part of like, okay, cool, I'm going to go run, and like, I'll make it a bit more of a different experience for me whenever I do it, Another one that I know has really stuck with people as far as habituation is that we are creatures of habit, some more than others, but whether we realize it or not, we do a lot of the same things every day. And an interesting kind of like, dare I say, I don't like the term so much, but a hack, but a way to like insert, not a poison pill, a medicine pill, let's call it that, a medicine pill into your life, just to kind of like get it into your routine, is a really useful way, I think, to get jump started with things that can change your awareness, kind of bring more presence and mindfulness to your life, or at the very least point you to what that actually is. That's one of the things I address in the book, is that like there are a lot of books and a lot of things written about mindfulness and presence, but people don't ever really talk about the actual experience. They talk about the ideas and kind of almost more like memes around the experience. But to actually talk about it is, I think, important to me, because people need to know like a target area. They need to know, what are you actually going for? Like that way they'll know how they're experiencing it, right? And so I don't, believe it or not, I like to simplify things, believe it or not. But I like simplifying things. Also, I love spinning out into nuance, but both, it's all the same to me. It's very fun, Anyway, but I like to make big ideas simple when appropriate. So one of the examples I use in the book that is really useful, or people have told me that has been really useful, is like in your morning routine, if you drink coffee in the morning, right? Go in there, instead of most people go in, they make their coffee, they slurp it down while they're looking at their phone, or while they're driving to work, or while they're getting dressed or whatever in the morning, and then I've been thinking about it. And just one of the simple, basic things I suggest is like you're already doing that. You're already making the coffee. You're already drinking it. Take 1 minute to just actually sit there, hold the coffee, and just be present with that experience of that first sip in the morning, of like feeling the warmth of the coffee roll across your tongue, taste all the flavors, feel the vapor and the warmth go into the back of your nasal cavity, feeling the veins and the arteries in your brain and head expanding as the caffeine begins to make your blood shift and change, and the heat expands throughout your body, and just really tasting and feeling that whole experience for a moment. And it's so simple, right? And it's so beautiful. But if you just attune and just train and point your focus to that singular experience, you start your day with this little glimpse of presence and of, just being there with life right now, without all of the momentum of distraction and the monkey mind, pushing you out of your awareness and your presence. And I've had so many people hit me up and tell me that's become like a ritual for them, is that coffee thing. And if you don't drink coffee, tea, or even water, I mean, I drink a lot of water, and it's like water itself it's equally magical. Everything is a crazily rich experience, but do something you like. And then once you do that, you can move it over to like, well, now I've had this taste of coffee, and I call it the spiritual sunrise, in the morning. You've had that. Now, what else in life can I become more present with and see, like, just experience it in a fuller, like in a more abundant way? So I'll talk about you get in the shower. A lot of people get in the shower, they, wash their target areas and then hop out, Or when you're in there, you can be doing the same thing, but just instead of having your mind just run wild into all of the odds and ends and the frazzled pieces of rope that are in your brain, like bring yourself into the moment with the experience of the shower, feeling the warm water rolling across your skin, feeling the steam in the shower, and the act and the ritual of like cleaning your body, and just being there in that, it's really such a luxurious moment, and just feeling that moment for what it is. And the more you begin to do that, even the simple like sensory type of things in life, driving, it's like you're literally like you're a surgeon out there. You're like hands on the wheel. You're carving up the road and moving in flow, and carving as you go up and down through the bumps and the hills, and stopping and the braking. It's like inhaling and exhaling, And so you begin to see, the more you do that in life, and the more that you experience life like that these are these little glimpses of, these beautiful experiences of presence, and actually being aware and here for your life, as opposed to lost in your mind in this illusion or hypothetical future, or some hypothetical anxiety, that you have to deal with, or that you don't have any control over. Because all of those scripts that are running in our minds are ultimately old programs that were useful and are sort of useful today, but it's basically the ego keeping you self-focused. Mm-hmm. And so our DNA doesn't care if we're happy or sad. We are a motel to our DNA. Mm-hmm. Our body is just this momentary stopping point until we procreate. It doesn't really care as long as we're alive, right? Happiness is a very modern thing. It's only in the last, 50 years to 80 years that like happiness has become a thing that we're like, all right, let's focus on this. Maybe this is something we should go for here. And so, like getting into those moments of presence really can help us see like that, all right, the anxiety, the crazy, weird, explosion of thoughts that are happening in our brain. Yep. That was useful a few 100,000 years ago, whenever we always needed to be so focused because there was threats, there was a bunch of wild things happening out there in the jungle. And we need to be aware and always thinking about having the camera on ourselves so that we're wrapped up in our own story like that. But now in modern society, we are really like a lot of that stuff is unnecessary. We don't need to be worried about the jaguar jumping out. We don't need to be worried about a competing tribe coming over and slaughtering everyone and stealing our stuff, or the danger coming over the horizon as much. We're sitting in a nice house, just hanging out in the air conditioning.
Yeah.
But that part of the amygdala is still running this, it's functioning and pumping adrenaline to that part of our brain that gives us anxiety and has our biological system fired up, like stay invested in your story at all costs. So the more that you can like learn from that, and, I think culturally and as a species, we're in this bridge moment between old brain and modern brain right now. And the tools of mindfulness help, soften and continue that journey across that bridge. So, attuning and tapping into, I've said attuning like 20 times in this podcast for some reason. I think it's because I'm looking at the knobs on your record player over there.
Tuning, yeah.
And so, tapping our brain in and focusing on presence and what is in front of us and the abundance of our actual lives, you begin to get these glimpses of presence. And then as you do that more and more and more, some of those, that script in the back of your brain of anxiety and self-focus and the inner critic begin to soften and fall away. And you begin on the stage of your mind noticing more of those lovely things, the things that we would want to notice more. The softness of the padding inside of your shoes, the comfort of this chair, the richness of a human interaction and experience, whatever it might be. And then those experiences one day, as you start focusing more on them, start touching together. And then now you've got this chunk of time. It's like, I was pretty like tapped in all afternoon. I felt good. I felt like patient and open and aware and like clear-minded. I wasn't like lost in some weird story that I was just making up about something that was completely irrelevant or ultimately impossible in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. I was actually here just enjoying existence. And then you kind of go off and get distracted for a few hours. And then before you go to bed at night, you'd be like, wait a second, I'm back again. I'm feeling aware. I'm feeling like grateful for the fact that I get to get into this bed at night it's like the luxury of like getting into a soft bed with a glass of water on your nightstand. You're living like a king for 80% of the rest of the world, is population getting into that moment like, wow, I got another day. This is wonderful. Like I'm back here. And then the more you do that, the more that just grows because of, neuroplasticity. I talk about that briefly in the book. It's like the more you think in those ways, you can build a scaffolding of those positive habits of meditation, of building in practices in your life where you're focusing on the present moment. You're focusing on the abundance and the beauty and the joy and all these things, and then the compassion, the emotion you can feel with people that you care about. The more that you do that, the more that your brain grows into thinking in that way. And then ultimately, over time, you will find that is the majority of what your resting state of awareness is.
Yeah, well, in a couple of things. First of all, like I noticed it last night when I was eating. I was in the sauna and I came in and I was eating fruit and I was just like shoveling it in. I'm like, this is an opportunity to eat each blueberry one at a time and savor it and pause, because I was obviously doing some research on the podcast today. But I think you brought up a point earlier that is so important, and I think probably most people missed it. All of what you're saying in here, you said it about the coffee, you're already doing it.
Right.
That's what I love about it.
Yeah.
And I know that's very intentional. You're not telling people to add a bunch of shit to what they're doing. You're saying you're doing these things already.
Yeah.
You're just going to pause for a minute or 30 seconds. Maybe it's 15 seconds in the beginning, or maybe you're just going to have an awareness that tomorrow I'm going to try this.
Right.
Whatever it is, just having that first step. You're not asking people to do all these things that you're doing. You're saying these are the things that you are probably doing in your life right now, or if they're not, like think about what you're doing in your life and just create that space to be aware of those things.
Absolutely. And one of the real beautiful byproducts of that is that my bullet point list is non-existent, right? It's like, well, I don't know, what are you already doing? Okay, great. Now just pay more attention to it. That's my bullet point list.
Yeah.
And what happens is that whenever you begin to be more aware of your own experience, a lot of people say like, well, I've joked a lot in the past about like mindfulness is just paying attention to now, being more present with what you're doing. Like you could be a mindful serial killer. It's like, I really feel the knife going in, all the subtlety and nuance. But what happens is that
we are a non-serial killer podcast, just for those out there.
That's exactly what a serial killer would say. So just be, but what happens generally in your life, in the human nature, is that as you begin to focus on these things and be more present and experience those things more, compassion generally arises naturally. And because ultimately, what are you doing whenever you're being closer to all those experiences? I'm kind of giving this sneaky, like low-key on-ramp with all this stuff to ultimately raising your awareness, right? So you're raising your self-awareness, and through awareness comes a greater understanding of who you are, why you are, what you're doing, all this stuff, all the things that you've been experiencing over the last couple of years. And in that, because the flashlight, of your inner life of what you are becomes brighter, and you start examining like, okay, well, why am I doing this? Why was I getting pissed off at my kids? Why was I whatever? That light doesn't stop expanding just inside you. It begins to move wider and wider and wider and wider. And because you're tapping into your feelings of, compassion and connection to yourself, you begin to have this kind of empathy with your own human condition, your own experience. And as that awareness grows, it begins to shine on others. And you start seeing like, oh, wait a second, they're also a human being too. And they're experiencing all the same stuff I'm experiencing. And you start seeing people from the inside out as opposed to from the outside in. And that is why through those practices, compassion and just a general desire for equanimity and peacefulness with other people comes on naturally. That's why, like, this stuff, you get into any of this stuff and it's like, oh, I feel I'm just like nicer now. That's why. You realize that we're all suffering, and suffering sucks. And we can mitigate it in ourselves and others with just the littlest amount of effort.
Well, this is a perfect segue to one of the last two things I want to talk about. The last thing I want us to finish with, and there's other stuff that we're going to have to do another time, but I want to talk about honestly, I just want you to talk about what you were talking about before we were rolling about jazz and how, because I think it's just a beautiful metaphor, and it kind of gets into some of the other stuff I want to talk about, but what you're talking about in compassion and seeing others as human beings, one of the things that probably brought that home for me was a deep psychedelic experience. And so psychedelics are a podcast in and of themselves, but I would just love your take on, it's becoming very popular in our culture now. Obviously MAPS is doing a ton of great work with MDMA, with psilocybin. I would love for you to just give people who are they have this idea about drugs and psychedelics and, what we were fed for so many years. A lot of people don't know that there was a ton of positive research up until the 60s and 70s that basically got shuttered and almost erased. And so they don't have the understanding that you and I have, that we've experienced. And so I would love for you just to talk a little bit about that and to maybe reframe that whole psychedelic experience for people and why it's useful.
Sure. Yeah. Basically, it's still the Wild West. It's becoming more, as far as the 60s and 70s goes, that's all the Wild West of that subject, and it's becoming, there's a lot more research and just experience and what have you now. And ultimately, I think that they have the potential to be very useful, not as an answer in any way, but they can be useful in cracking that egg, like we were talking about at the beginning. They can show an individual, because they make the mind and the part of the brain that deals with our perception, it makes it more malleable and a bit more modular. It can allow an individual to see things in a different way. And that's whenever, when I was in high school taking giant doses of LSD and looking at a picture of a Horsehead Nebula star system, I was like, whoa, that looks like Jabba the Hutt wearing a purple wig or whatever, and then coming back and be like, wow, now it looks like, whatever. And then next day looking at it and be like, oh, that's like a star, it's just a gaseous star. Having that sort of awareness of like, oh, wow, you can see things in different ways, even in the same person. And then perhaps we're always in that state of like seeing things in one certain way. And maybe I can see things in multiple ways at once. And it's like, with enough of that work, that classic diagram of like, is this two faces or a vase? Well, it's like, well, it's two faces and a vase and just a bunch of squiggly lines all at the same time. It's all of the above, right?
It's fucking all of it, which is back to our original thing where it's not black and white, binary. Right. It's all of it.
Yes. And so, so they can be useful in that for that kind of jump starting and popping someone out of that mold. And that can be with just understanding perspectives and shades of the world outside of oneself, but also internally. All of us have emotional repressions and bridges and kind of compartmentalizations of different things that we've agreed that, okay, this story was this way and I'm going to pack this away. And, my stomach will hurt a little bit every day for the rest of my life, but fine. I'm just going to that's what happened and this is what is. And then they can sort of like it can puncture the membrane a little bit on some of our own experiences, let them come out and allow us to sort of revisit our self in a different way.
It kind of amplifies, right? Yeah. It brings it out.
But I think it's people will have different opinions on this. To me, I don't look at, I'm very, very cautious of anything that has kind of a religiosity applied to it in some way. Because there is this quote unquote psychedelic renaissance happening, there's a lot of like, oh, this is the answer. And then people get, they take it on as this identity and kind of turn it into almost this kind of super religious type of fanatical thing.
Right.
And fine, if that's what someone wants to do, then fine. But I think that with anything, just kind of taking some of the romanticism off of it and like, all right, this is a tool and it's very useful and it's becoming popular and ingrained in the cultural lexicon because it's shown under controlled settings to have useful results. And nothing is a savior. That's the thing. There's nothing in life, whether it's your God, my God, no God, this book, that psychedelic, this thing, this podcast, that podcast, this relationship, whatever, this amount of money, this car, whatever the thing is, nothing is a cure-all. They're all doorways to potential.
It's information.
And so with like psychedelics, it opens you up to, it allows you to kind of step through and see this other perspective on yourself and other things. But everything that comes from that, all of the growth and usefulness is up to you wanting to do the work after that. And that's integration. That is just picking up that torch and continuing to walk and really develop yourself now that you've had that kind of crack in the concrete and you see a little bit of the light. It's up to you to get out the chisel and then chisel through and break through that thing,
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think it's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, that it's not a panacea for all your issues. In that experience that I was talking about, I definitely felt a much deeper connection to life in general. I started to see things, and you know this, that you see things as they are without judgment, without guilt, and it allows you to just allow them to be as they are. And I made the mistake to your point exactly of thinking, because I saw those things, that I was cured of the issues.
Cured.
And
As if anyone is ever possible. The only cure for life is death.
yes. Well, and and I saw the ways that I was not showing up. And so I said, oh, okay, so I get it now. And then 2 months later, Peyton and I had the worst fight that we'd ever had, and to this point have ever had. And I'm like, I thought I had it all figured out. And
That's why you had to fight, by the way. It's because you thought you had it all figured out.
Yeah, and it's like, this is the reminder. Like, no, motherfucker, you don't. You still have to do the work. And so, that, to your point, that's the easy part is drinking the tea with the mushrooms in it. The hard part, it can be hard when you're actually in the experience. It can be challenging, but the real hard part, the challenging part, is to do that work, to do the heavy lifting. And so you've seen, as you said, you've seen a crack, you've seen a little bit of insight. Are you willing to do the work to really open that up? And so I'm glad you brought that up, because I think a lot of people are evangelizing about this being the be all end all.
Right.
And I think it can be an amazing tool, and it's really worked for me, but it's one of so many things that I've really stepped into in the last 2.5, it's fucking just 2.5 years.
Yeah.
But it's not the only thing, and I don't even think it's necessarily the most important thing, even if I could figure out what the most important thing is, whether it's silent retreats, getting in cold water, like shit like that.
Yeah,
like,
well, you're doing the most important thing right now. That's just being a person.
Yeah.
That's just like existing.
That's it.
That's the real, everyone feels like they aren't enough, but the real magic trick is just existing at all in the first place.
And just knowing that.
It's just like, cool, well, I'm here. This is amazing. Now, how can we fine tune this sucker a little bit?
Yeah. Well, and so with that in mind, again, there's so much other shit we have to talk about. It'll be for another time. Can you just share again what when you were explaining to my wife Peyton about jazz? It's such a beautiful kind of unfolding. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm always happy to talk about that if anyone's willing to listen. I was just telling her we were listening. I was speaking with her. We were listening to a record before this, and she was bringing up a movie she had seen where one of the characters was playing a jazz record to someone else. Now he was like going on about how much he liked it and whatever. And that it, sounded a little bit raucous, and I can't remember if the other character was finding it hard to listen to or something like that. But point is that the reason I like the more wild and complex jazz, like what's called free jazz, and even more particularly what people call spiritual jazz, which is like Alice Coltrane or Pharoah Sanders or Sun Ra or something like that, or John Coltrane stuff. The reason I like that music so much is because, to me, I've spent all of my musical career and life trying to philosophically and conceptually reflect nature and the ideas, like just the happening of the whole thing, right? And jazz, that particular form of it, does it so well because in improvisational, like free jazz, I can just hear people pressing pause and stop on their iPods right now, or their iPhones.
Yeah, that's fine. They got you a couple hours.
But the way that music is even designed to be played is like, it's generally like each instrumentalist has their approach and their like language, and they'll generally, they would have like, here's a concept, or here's some modal kind of musical starting points, but from there's then a rhythmic and a melodic language that we will just be talking. So the drummer or the bass player are playing within a certain framework of style, but rhythmically they're shifting in real time in reaction and response to all the other players. And the bass player is communicating, often, of course, with the drummer, because the bass and drums of any group is kind of the meat and bones of the rhythmic structure of a group and of music in general. So they're communicating on one level, still freely talking, melodically and rhythmically to each other and changing in response to what each other are doing. But then you've got all the other instrumentalists, and as we were talking at the beginning of this, we might as well paint a Zen calligraphy circle here to complete this whole loop of our conversation. Someone in like Alice Coltrane's music, where they'll have tempuras, which are an Indian droning instrument, then you could have that going on, like this stasis happening of this one sound that's just kind of happening over and over and over. And that creates this singularity element. And then you've got someone playing saxophone or piano or a harp or whatever it might be. And so you've got all of these people all doing that thing where they're all playing individually in response to each other. And it will shift and move, and one player will take over, the lead, and they'll start soloing or something like that. And everyone's just responding to that, and then they'll move out whenever they feel right, and someone else will come in. I love in like crazy free jazz moments whenever the drummer starts like leading the thing, where it's like, oh yeah, because it's so counterintuitive to what people think of as music, right? But the reason I like that so much is because what they're doing is personifying and articulating the natural flow of existence. Is that you think about the way that just the natural world happens. I call it the self-organizing nature of being, where the birds have chosen they're flying in a flock in some area. All the bison are herding up this through some particular area and running. Water is flowing. Fish are moving around the ocean. There's someone in Shanghai walking across a crosswalk right now. There's someone in Paris falling in love. We're having this conversation. There's someone sitting in the top of a skyscraper in New York at work right now. Like, it's all happening. The grass is growing as we're talking. It's raining outside right now. The microbes in the soil are starting to pop and move around and whatever. Like, our food is digesting in our stomach. There's electricity flowing through the audio equipment that someone is listening to this very conversation with. Like, everything is happening all at once, completely organized. It's the chaos, the beautiful self-organizing flow of allness, of everythingness, the totality, right? And that's something I think about all the time. It's actually what led to my existential paralysis. That's enough for a story for another time.
Yes.
But anyway, but jazz, free jazz in particular, I love it because it is basically reflecting the openness, the freeness, and the infinity of the language of life itself.
Beautiful. We're going to end on that note.
I like it.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Thank you, man.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And again, we'll link to all your good stuff in the show notes. The book, Now is the Way, an Unconventional Approach to Modern Mindfulness. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, thank you, man. I really appreciate it.